I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to our 5th annual conference on sexuality, integrity, and the university. At the Love and Fidelity Network, we aim to reshape the conversation about marriage, family, and sexual integrity. We aim to build the next generation of leaders for marriage, family, and sexual integrity on college campuses and beyond. And you here are that next generation. Our national conference is designed to enable you to communicate important realities in a way that is effective, compelling, and articulate with your friends and classmates. And this conference connects students to leading scholars and experts to equip you with the best arguments and resources you need. We want to help you be a voice on your campus and beyond that. For this conference, students from nearly 30 schools registered. Many were still able to make it, and we are so grateful for that. This weekend, you'll hear from an incredible lineup of scholars and experts, but it's really up to you, what you'll do with what you learn this weekend. The lessons that you learn here don't leave tomorrow night or Sunday morning when you leave Princeton, but they're designed to inspire you and equip you in your efforts, making the vision you share with friends back at home and classmates and colleagues even more compelling. Without further ado, let me introduce Paul Kerry. Paul Kerry is an associate professor of history and associate dean of undergraduate studies at Brigham Young University and a fellow of the Wheatley Institution. His research and publications focus on European intellectual and transatlantic history. His most recent project is a forthcoming book on Benjamin Franklin, which he co-edited with Matthew Holland. He has had visiting fellowships at the universities of Cambridge and Edinburgh, and was the Anne and Herbert W. Vaughan Visiting Fellow at Princeton University's James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. More recently, he was a visiting fellow at the Wolf Institute for the Study of Relations between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and a research associate at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. He received his Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Oxford, where he was a member of St. John's College. Dr. Kerry is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society. Dr. Kerry has been a tremendous advocate for the Love and Fidelity Network and our annual conference since its very beginning. During the 2009 conference, he served on a panel on faith and sexual integrity, and each year he encourages a large group of students from across the country and sometimes even overseas to join us. We are so thrilled to have him join us again this year as our conference moderator. This evening, Dr. Kerry will help us put what we learned this weekend in a greater context with his remarks entitled Marriage, Family, and Civilization, an Introduction to the Stakes and Cultural Implications. Please welcome Dr. Kerry.
Thank you. One of the things that I want to get across to you is that this is happening inside of a context. This context right now is something that both political candidates have spoken about. Both have spoken about the importance of families. We're going to have an election in which we all get to voice our view for the political leader of the country. Regardless, though, of who wins that particular election, we all know that there are things that are foundational and fundamental that will exceed either candidate that need us to participate in. Of these areas, marriage, sexuality, and families are critical. How critical are they? I had wanted to tell you a little bit about the Harvard sociologist, Carl Zimmerman, whose thesis on families is incredibly important. I'm not going to be able to go into the details that I would have liked to then, but perhaps I can give you a couple of other insights that might be helpful in putting into context some of what you'll be hearing tonight and tomorrow. One of them comes from a UCLA clinical psychiatrist, Miriam Grossman, who published her book anonymously at first, Unprotected. And forgive me, I have this written out, but I'm just going to condense it very briefly. She speaks about a phenomenon that she sees on campuses regularly now. And this is something that I heard her speak about right here. As you heard, I was a fellow of the James Madison program here at Princeton University, and we had an Anscombe Society meeting. And I first got to know the Anscombe Society through my visiting fellowship here, and they had invited Dr. Grossman to come and speak. And she speaks of a phenomenon in which she'll receive a knock at the door, and she'll answer, invite the student to come in. And as they begin to speak, they go over the things that might cause stress, eating properly, exercise, sleeping, all the things that you get so much of course, as university students because of all the extra time you've got. And she says that the worry that's on the student, a female student's mind, doesn't ever seem to be resolved. So the student's about to leave, and then she says, well, there is this guy. Talk about a relationship. The students involved in the hookup culture doesn't understand. Why am I not feeling satisfied? Why am I not happy in this type of situation? Why isn't this something that's bringing me something? And the hard part is, there's a kind of logic that the student has undergone, saying, I understand what I've been told about equality. Isn't this equal? I get what I want, he gets what he wants. There shouldn't be any feelings on my side. And she introduces, of course, the subject of biology and nature, and how sometimes, if nature goes against your ideology, it might be time, she says, to think about changing your ideology. Because nature isn't going to give way. In fact, that's one of the topics of a book that I use in a course that I teach just this past semester, What We Can't Not Know. You'll hear from Dr. Buchevsky tomorrow, and he's got a new book out on the meaning of sex. And in that, he talks about the bitter and the sweet, and how sometimes through repeatedly experiencing the bitter, even if you call it the sweet and insist that it's sweet, it will not be sweet. And we come to understand that through our consciences, but also through exposure to something that I'm sure we'll touch on tomorrow, known as the natural law, a realization of things that we already know and that we can't not know, except when we try to rationalize, but it breaks through our rationalization. Tomorrow we're also going to learn about something that I think is very important at this particular juncture politically of our culture. In fact, recently the President Obama, has invited us to get out of the polarities of what he calls name-calling, bigot versus pervert for same-sex marriages. In his 2009 talk, when he was speaking on fathers, this is a very insightful, sensitive talk as a father of daughters. He understands, I think, something of the family, and it certainly came through how deeply he loves his own family. And when I say understand something of it, I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I mean for the country. He's able to establish in this talk something that we can all learn from. And I think one of the things that he has called for is a civil discourse on the meaning of marriage, that it's time to really discuss this as a nation. And tomorrow we'll have that opportunity, listening to Dr. Regneris as he talks to us about his own research on same-sex marriage. The foundation of President Obama's remarks is that marriage is about responsibilities, and it's also about the children. As a New York Times editorial has recently stated, this is a grand experiment, same-sex marriage. We need data. We need to understand what will be the impact. And so I think it's very important to heed the President's words, that we have a civil discussion and look at the data and begin to analyze and to think about what is the impact on families. Certainly we'll learn also tomorrow, through Roland Warren, about fathers, the necessity of fathers in the home, and how important it is to have that father figure in the home, but also intact families. In fact, the Nobel Prize winner in the year 2000, a PhD graduate from Princeton University, James Heckman, his research on investing in families, particularly children who are younger, between the ages of, say, 1 and 6, and in some cases even 1 to 10, 1 to 11, he says that yields more productivity from an economic standpoint. He's an economist at the University of Chicago. Eminent, of course, is that university for economics, particularly, amongst many other subjects. He has said that we need to pay attention to these ages, that the children need to be invested in. And all of his research presupposes and shows us that intact two-parent families, where a child who is privileged to be born into a family of a mother and a father, where that mother and father welcome that child, that's really the solution. We talk about poverty, but really, how do we solve poverty? Of course, there are many ways, and we will be thinking about this for much longer than this conference, but families seem to be one of those keys. Intact families and children who emerge from intact families seem to avoid poverty by and large, also prison, many other of the features of society that we would wish for our own kin and children through those families, and we're going to hear about that as well. You might ask yourself, why is it that these questions are occurring? Well, one of the things that Dr. Grossman talks about, and also Professor Robert George here at Princeton University, as well as other scholars, is that you're learning on occasion at the university things that might not sit well with how you might have been trained at home. In fact, Dr. Grossman goes further and says there's a radical agenda at work that might actively be seeking to undermine things that you will have learned from other institutions in your life, such as perhaps your churches or synagogues, your family life. In fact, we might even see that, as George Weigel has said, that there might be attempts to have the social space in our lives overwhelmed by government, that even if in attempts, benevolent attempts, to fill up that space with ways that it thinks we should behave, that we need to be careful, to protect our structured and ordered liberty, but also to understand that the family is the transmitter of values. It's the family that forms culture. Aristotle understood this. He argued that, how is it that we learn virtue? Well, of course, you can learn it at school from a book, but largely it's passed on through formation of institutions. He says communities, such as the polis, and the family are absolutely essential. The churches, the synagogues are essential. These mediating institutions, to use a term that I believe Father John Newhouse had used, are essential to, A, preventing all of our social space to be gobbled up by any state. We've certainly seen in the 20th century what happens when governments attempt to do that. We've seen the Nazi dictatorship. We've seen communist totalitarian regimes eat up that social space. And to allow these organizations to be supported by law. The law has primary functions, of course, to protect us. But the law also, as should public policy, support subsidiarily in a helpful way families. Families to be able to come together to teach. Also organizations. And those organizations are very, very helpful in calling out, sometimes when necessary, institutions, governments, when they are encroaching. I have someone that I've looked at and would have liked to have talked to you more about this evening. Bishop von Galen. He stood 6'7", a German Catholic bishop from Münster, Germany. That's where he served. He noticed after the Hitlerite regime had taken over that it was racist. He spoke out against it. He helped to pen, along with the Eugenio Pacelli, who would become the Pope Pius XII, he helped to pen an essay with burning anxiety, mit brennender Sorge in German, calling the regime out. And in fact, when he noticed that an order had been given by Adolf Hitler, a signed order, we have the document, Action T4 was its code name, T standing for Tiergartenstrasse, for fear. It was the address of the Eugenics Institute. And this action ordered that those who were deemed unfit, unproductive, those whose lives were deemed as unworthy of living, lebensunwertes Leben, a phrase that had come out in the Weimar era under the Weimar progressives, that this was now being taken by the state and applied to the German people. He stood up courageously. Perhaps in some ways we can understand why, similarly, we have bishops today speaking out with things that seem to encroach upon the religious liberty of all of us. And just as we ought to look back with gratitude on those with courage, the Dietrich Bonhoeffers, the Bishop von Galens, we should also look today and remember that those freedoms need to be protected. Life, and this is what Bishop Van Galen understood. Anytime he said you break the fifth commandment, nothing else is safe. Life itself is sacred, needs to be protected, deserves to be protected. And that's why we see as well in the bigger political context with our healthcare situation, why we have people of goodwill all across the political spectrum standing up, churches standing up, to say that our religious liberty is being encroached on here. And we need to be able to move that back out of that sphere. So this is the kind of general context in which we're in. As I said, I would have enjoyed thoroughly to have spoken to you more. But I think the better part of valor in this case is to be more humble and to allow Professor Fagan to take over. Let me introduce him. I want you to get to know him a little bit. You've got his introduction in the program, of course. He has a PhD. He's a senior fellow and director of the Marriage and Religion Research Institute, Family Research Council, a native of Ireland, trained as a psychologist at the University College Dublin, where he received his doctorate. Speaking of religious liberty, and I didn't speak with him about this beforehand, but some of my associates from Great Britain, where I've spent some time, have pointed out to me that UCD, University College Dublin, was necessary to be created because there wasn't as much religious liberty in Ireland at certain points in its history, and that the elite institutions weren't letting Catholics in. I don't know if Professor Fagan falls into this category, but you see that it's everywhere that religious liberty needs to be protected. He works in his research at the intersection of the relationship between sexuality, marriage, religious practice, and community within the United States, as well as, and this attracted me particularly, the transatlantic context, seeing differences between what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the United States, and asking why those differences are there. He zeroes in on issues such as pornography that influence all of these areas: community, family, religion, sexuality. And as far as I know, is the only one that's coined the phrase, which I find insightful as well as disturbing, that pornography is the quote-unquote quiet family killer, unquote. He's practiced therapy in Canada. He has worked in government and at think tanks such as the Heritage Institute, the Heritage Foundation. He's worked in different presidential administrations. You'll find his research translated into various languages. As you can see, he's got the clinical, public policy, academic experience, but perhaps I should add, and maybe even more importantly, he's got some practical experience. He and his wife, Teresa, formerly Gallagher, have 8 children, 4 boys, 4 girls, and I'm sure that that has added to the understanding that he has and insights into the family. Let's welcome Dr. Patrick Fagan.
Tonight, we're going to talk about the retreat from marriage and how it's hurting the economy. We'll illustrate its effect on how it's hurting the economy, but then actually this applies right across all the major institutions. And the first area actually that I am going to deal with, where we have the data, at the Marriage and Religion Research Institute, we're setting off on a rather ambitious project. Any of you who are in economics know the economists have models of the economy. Wharton Business School, one is very famous. The Congressional Budget Office has one, all based on data of decades and decades of massive amounts of data, which track how when people behave one way and when things are done to the economy, what happens to it, how taxes affect economic behavior, etc. We're doing something different. Using census data going back decades and decades, we're building a model of the social behavior of the country, and as people act particular ways, how that then in turn affects income, education, health, crime, etc. So it's a social model, analogous to or parallel to the econometric models. And we're at the very beginning of this, but some of the first data and the first charts, when you go to the PowerPoint, you'll see are the first fruits of this model building. And the first measures we've been looking at, and we started a year and a half ago, are income. Some of the things we can definitely say, it's repeatedly there. The Federal Reserve has the Survey of Consumer Finance, and it's a biannual survey. They dig into spending and taxes and all the rest. Sample size is not huge, and we don't build the model on that, but it's a very good illustration. You can see there repeatedly the top income, the median income, because with billionaires, a number of billionaires can throw the average off quite a bit, so we take the median. But the median income constantly is highest for the married family. The married family with children, higher than anyone else, higher than the step family with children, divorced, remarried, and then the others. So if you were to look, always you'd see that. There's one sort of outlier, which is very high. The intact married family would be there, the step family would be there, then it drops down for the others, except there's a sudden spike over here for the widow. And of course, the widow is most likely the living spouse of an intact married family, and the husband had done proper prudent things, and she has a good insurance policy which pushes her, which is the fruit of intact married family. That doesn't happen to cohabiting couples. They don't buy insurance on each other. If you were to look at the opposite, the second chart I have is the percent of children in poverty and minority children, and it's highest actually. One of the things that used to be the case, it was highest in the single parent family. Now it's highest actually in the cohabiting family. Poverty and what's happening, marriage is retreating, cohabitation is coming in, and you can see it is not a solution, quite the opposite. Second thing, major measure we're doing, and it's not part of the model yet, eventually it will, we're taking a look at the United States on the intactness of states, of cities, of even counties. We're now able, this year we have an annual report, the Index of Belonging and Rejection, and we take kids at age 17, when they've just about finished their growing up at home, just about to leave and go to college or venture out on their own. The family has virtually done its work. At age 17, what proportion of our children are in an intact married family? I think it's the single most parsimonious measure you could get on the social health of the country, or the future social health of the country. At present, by our estimate, it's of 2 years ago, there's a time lag from the census data. 2 years ago, it is now 46.4% reach age 17 in intact married family, which means over half their parents have split, either never came together or split before age 17. Among the ethnic group, you can break that down by ethnic groups, the highest intact ethnic group are Asian Americans at 62%. Then white Caucasian, 52%. Then Hispanic, 40%. American Indian, 22%, 24%. And the lowest is African American, which is at 17%. The impact of that was, for instance, to give you one startling statistic, this came out and was verified 2 or 3 times in major research back about 10, 15 years ago. But if you control for marriage, there's very little difference in the incarceration rate of young black men and young white men. You don't hear much about that. You hear a lot about the incarceration. But if you control for marriage, there's virtually no difference. There is a little, but not at all significant. Young white men who grow up in broken families go to jail pretty much the same rate as young black men. The only difference is the rate of breakdown is very different. Young black men who grow up in intact married families go to jail at much the same rate as young white men who grow up in intact married families, and it's very low. When you control for marriage, there's virtually no difference. Now, behind all of this, actually, what you really have going on here in America, I would reframe what's happening. We have a major crisis of male and female. Most men and women who've come together to give new life to a young child, most American men and women cannot now stand each other enough to raise that kid to adulthood. The sexual revolution has brought about an increasing alienation between the sexes, not a coming together. And I think this is almost, very easy to see when you think about it a bit, but I think it needs a bit of this reframing. What we have is a crisis of non-belonging. Rather than belonging, which is what the pill and the sexual revolution and contraceptives and all the rest are supposed to facilitate, the ease of men and women coming together, what you have instead actually is a less and less capacity to come together and to belong. Said another way, what we're really building is a culture of rejection. And rejection is powerful in its ill effects on both men and women, on the adults as well as the children. We are made to belong, and when we belong, if you, let's say, those of you who've freshmen this year coming to college, it's nice to be welcomed. It's nice for people to come up and say, hello, you're welcome, and they go out of their way to make you welcome. It is awful to feel, there's a group you want to enter, and you get the message, you're not wanted here. That hurts deeply here. All of us, when we were adolescents, probably fell in love with somebody of the opposite sex. And, you might have fallen in love from a distance, and you're hoping for the best, but you're rebuffed. The pain of that. It hurts. Now, that's not life-threatening. That's probably part of growing up. It's very different when you've committed to somebody, taken vows, brought children into the world, structured your whole life around, and then been rejected by that person. Massive in its impacts. And we get into some of them. If we were to look actually what's happening to men, and the first studies in the model when you get to see it, and actually some of the handouts, I don't know, we have handouts, were they given out today? You pick them up at check-in, and on the handouts that will be there at check-in, you'll see the first couple of charts are from this model. And what we can see is actually happening in the economy. The backbone of the economy, sorry ladies, but this is the case. If you look at it, the backbone of the economy are married men with children. They're the ones who do the heavy lifting. And you see it very much during recessions and depressions. Women who are married to men have much more flexibility. They can come in and out of the workforce as their desires or the family need is. But the man, by and large, has to be out there earning the money. And if he's married and has kids, he knows there's plenty of people dependent on him. And what you see, there's a lot of long history on this. One of the great longitudinal studies, the Iowa Farm Study, done by a great professor out in California. You can see it there. Through recessions and depressions, married men stay working. Single men drop out. At lesser rates, cohabiting men drop out, but they drop out very significantly. And what we're seeing happening in the economy with the retreat from marriage, there's less and less married men out there working hard. And increasingly, the productivity of the United States is dropping. You look across the for instance, one of the studies we've done is the only study we claim proof of causation. The divorce revolution, which has now become pretty enculturated, the levels of divorce, the level of breakup, has slowed down the growth rate of the American economy by at least 1/6. That's a very conservative estimate. And there's a gradual decrease. You can see the growth rate of the American economy has gradually been decreasing. And the major factor there is the decrease in the human capital of the workers of the United States. And the main reason for that decrease is the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of marriage. For instance, Heckman, whom Dr. Kerry referred to, the Nobel laureate, he was talking there about age 6. By age 6, the capacity of the child is virtually locked in. There's a bit more can be added between 6 and 10, but by and large in the macro data, the child, by the time they're 6, most of the groundwork has been laid on which all the rest is going to be built. And the child from the intact married family has huge advantages over the other child. Talk to any teacher of first, second, third grade. They'll tell you this story again and again and again. They see it in the kids as they walk into the classroom. So as there's this retreat from marriage, there is this continuing weakening of the human capital, on average, of the children who become the adults in the United States. We don't have the capacity, no matter what we do, no matter what president does, what the Congress does, to do all the reforms that are needed in matters economic. They can optimize the economic conditions. What that cannot do is restore the human capital that's necessary to be highly productive. That is going to take a totally different order of work, and the Love and Fidelity network is right at the core and at the cutting edge of that work that has to be done to restore that sort of economic capacity. That's not the only, that's probably not your motivation at all, but that's going to be one of the side effects. If you look into the data that we have on the charts, and we'll show the difference actually, it holds across education. We break it down by the different education groups, by the different professional classes. You see this impact of marriage across all groups on their productivity. Another area, actually, we're a very plain area, going back to the survey of consumer finance, the Federal Reserve survey. You see it in the hours worked. The people who work the most in the marketplace, by and large, there's a little exception, I'll get into it, are the married couple. And the married men, definitely. The intact married men are the ones who put the most hours into the marketplace. One of the, actually, this is a bit of an aside, but when dealing with poverty, I grew up in Ireland, what you would call a sort of a lower middle class, working class area. All the fathers worked. Ireland, back in the 50s and 60s, was virtually an underdeveloped country. We became the Celtic Tiger a bit later. But one of the things you expected, and actually happened, was that poor people, and I was in an area where some people were a bit poorer than others, and you were, actually in Ireland we were very aware, we have this thing where a penny farthing looks down on a penny halfpenny looks down on a penny farthing. We were very, very conscious of the gradations of economic strata. Poorer people worked longer and harder. And that was the expectation I had. Over here, the poor, you'd have commiseration for the poor. Actually, in the United States, poor people work less and less and less. The poorer people get, actually, the less they work. It's the very opposite. There's something not right going on there in the acculturation process. But you see this also across family structures. Step families, actually, in step families, which are very frequently divorced and remarried, the one who works longer there actually is the wife. She works more than does the wife of the intact married family. She doesn't work as long as her husband, but she does work longer. On the poverty issue, actually, another huge thing, and this, a colleague of mine at the Heritage Foundation, Robert Rector, who's one of the key, most knowledgeable people in welfare, probably the big architect, the biggest architect of the welfare reform of '94. He did a computer experiment, let's call it this way, not exactly an experiment, it was an analog. He took the census data of all the children under the poverty line in single-parent families. There were 3.9 million. This is back in the year 2000. And on the computer, married them to the father, the real father of those children. They were able to figure that out from the census data. Now, this only happened on the computer. When you merge the income of the father to the income of the mother, 80% of those kids were brought above the poverty line. 80%, without doing a single thing. And actually, if it was real marriage, it would have gone up much higher, because when men marry, their productivity increases by about 27% when you control for everything. That's why men try to put marriage off a bit. They know that once you start marrying, you got to work a lot harder. We all know that. And ladies, it isn't that you aren't attractive, it's the amount of work you make us do. Actually, on savings, going on from income to savings, marriage makes a huge difference. And this has not yet gotten out. Those of you who are going into economics, pay some attention to this, get this out. Wall Street depends on marriage for the capital. The savings that is done in the country is overwhelmingly done in the intact married family. Which means the ownership, the stocks. Actually, talk to any stockbroker. Talk to any insurance salesman. Where they make their sales, most of the time, are to married couples. They don't look at it. Wall Street doesn't understand this yet. They need marriage more than they realize. Actually, one of the other things is those who are much more interested in looking at just the economic end, the libertarian argument, the libertarians who are very high on the economy are a bit wobbly on matters of marriage. They need to be brought to understand this. The economy needs marriage, both for productivity and for savings and for capital. If you fast forward, actually, I've been talking there, the data on married couples raising children. If you fast forward to people in their 50s and 60s, that becomes just so much bigger. The difference between them and other family structures gets greater and greater. The savings done over a lifetime begin to have a huge effect by the time at the age of 50, 55, 60, 65. I'm going to skip over some of these. One of the things actually that one of the very first studies we did on the model as it played out, and this is coming into effect now, as the baby boomers are retiring. One of the long-term effects, after the baby, you had a baby boom, and a boom is followed by a trough. Now the baby boomers are retiring, so the population that's coming up behind them is actually a trough. So there's less people replacing, as it were, the pipeline as they age. There's a second thing, however, that's happening, and that is that trough and those who follow, as I pointed out earlier, their human capital is less. So the earnings capacity of the United States, we're going into over the next decade, we've projected it out because everybody's already in the population. It's not so much a projection sort of figuring what might happen, it's just an aging forward. And we can see we're going into a 10-year significant drop in income, which has absolutely nothing to do with the economic conditions, but has everything to do with the population number and the human capital of that population. It's dropping. So even if President Obama, President Romney, a Republican or a Democrat Congress makes all the reforms we want in the economy, you're still facing this massive drop in income because the population of people in the marketplace is dropping and their human capital. Two very significant things. Now, one of the big things, if you're all very aware of, and there's the chart in there, I won't bother illustrating it, but the more education you get, your lifetime earnings are going to be much higher. PhDs don't get the highest, actually. The second highest on average, it's professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants. They make much more money than PhDs, and any professor will quickly tell you that that's true. However, what's clearly linked to that is how well kids do in school. You go back to what Heckman was talking about, by age 6, so much is locked in. I know Dr. Regnerus, who's here among us, who we'll be hearing from tomorrow, he's done a lot of work, I know, on the Ad Health Survey, and we've done some there. You can see very clearly, actually, grade point average by family structure is much higher. This is repeated across many other things in the intact married family. So that's going to translate into not only high school performance, but college, graduate, and all the rest of it. So the family structure is key to the education performance, which in turn translates into income, which translates into savings. And by the way, we haven't done the work in this, but I'm hoping we'll eventually into taxes. Now, we haven't proven this yet. And it's very hard to get the data because Treasury doesn't keep the data well by family structure. They have, but not all the different forms of the family. You know, whether they're married or not, married or single, but not the different family structures within. But everything to me points that the politicians, Congress and the state legislatures are very dependent on the married family for their income. Because if the highest income is coming from the intact married family and the highest savings is coming from there, it follows to me with a logic, but we haven't yet proved it, that the highest taxes are probably coming from there. So what we probably have happening in the country is a transfer of payments from the marrieds to the unmarrieds. And as the breakdown in marriage becomes more acculturated, as there's a retreat from marriage, there's an increasing tension happening that can be exploited for good or evil. And I think we've got to figure out how to do it in a good way so that that lesson is driven home and the issues of justice begin to be brought to the fore. Wait now, if you make a choice to have a kid out of wedlock and repeatedly, wait now, who's paying for it? Well, actually, it's the marrieds are paying for the unmarrieds. It's the marrieds are paying for the kids of divorce. There's a huge shift. There's a social justice issue there to be raised. Right across the education area, actually, you see in expulsions, in repeating grade, in kids getting hauled into the principal for whatever, marriage has a huge, huge effect. And the breakdown in marriage has as well. Now, okay, I think that would have been, well, I've done my best on the acting out charts. I'm sure it's not as good as Excel and Microsoft would have done it. But let's go on, actually. There is a chart in there I do want you to have a look at. And it comes from the National Survey of Family Growth. And what we looked at there was the intactness of marriage depending on the number of sexual partners a woman has had. And we want to repeat this a number of times, but on the one run we did on it, it was very significant. National Survey of Family Growth is all about fertility, and it goes from age 14 to 44. What we did was we took the second half of that, from 30 to 44, and this is just looking at the women. So they've lived long enough to have a sexual history behind them. Taking the women from 30 to 44, the measure we looked at was what proportion of them are still in an intact married family, depending on the number of sexual partners they've had in their lifetime. Now, the woman who's had only one sexual partner, and that's her husband, she's had no non-marital sexual relations. Without knowing anything else, and this is not good, this is just straight correlation, so there's all sorts of caveats going to be put up behind it, but the numbers are dramatic. Without knowing anything about her, 80% of those women are in an intact marriage. Here's the kicker. Well, on average, with one sexual partner, it drops from 80 down to 54. Huge drop. And with a second sexual partner, it's down to 44. And then it begins to plateau for the next 3 or 4. Then it plateaus, and then it drops a bit. But the huge drop is from sort of intactness, virginal marriage, down to, or it might have been a shotgun thing, we're not controlling for that. But where the woman has only had one sexual partner, her husband, 80%. With somebody outside of that, and for the vast majority of those women, I'm sure it was before they got married. It dropped down to 54, then down to 44. Have a look at that chart when you see it. It has huge impacts for the work you're doing. It needs to be replicated. It needs then for all sorts of controls and other things to be done, but it's rather dramatic. If you look at that same series, actually, there's a series of charts you're looking after. The number of sexual partners and the rate of abortion goes up. The number of sexual partners and the rate of out-of-wedlock births. I'm sure you could add STDs and lots of other things. It's a bit of common sense, actually, after a while. Related to all of this, and increasingly, I think, coming into the social science, is the impact of religious practice. No surprise at all, the teenagers and college kids who worship weekly have the lowest rate of extramarital, or have the lowest rate of unmarried sexual intercourse. And the less frequently they worship, the more that goes up. Lowest will be weekly, a couple of times a month, a couple of times a year, never. Actually, on religious practice, you find that Mark Regneris, who is here tomorrow, he can speak to this with greater erudition than I can. But from everything I've been able to see, on every measure marriage so far, any study I've looked at or come across, when you look at the outcome by frequency of worship, on every measure, those who worship weekly do best. And it goes virtually like this. They do best a couple of times a month, a couple of times a year, never. Occasionally there's a wobble at the end. Dave Larson, who was a great pioneer in this field, he used to have it. Sometimes a little religion is a dangerous thing. And the first piece of research he found that out on was on anxiety about dying. It was he was a psychiatrist, an epidemiological psychiatrist, so anxiety was one of his things. One of the measures they looked at, people who are facing death, the ones who have the greatest anxiety about dying, it's lowest among those who worship weekly, a bit higher among those who worship a couple of times a month. It's highest among those who worship a couple of times a year, and then it drops down for those who never worship. In other words, those who gave God a little attention but not much are the most fearful of facing Him. On all outcomes, actually, then if you combine the family structure and the religious practice, when we've done this, we've got a whole series. If you go to the MARRI website, we've got a series we call it Mapping America. It's just straight mapping. It's purely correlational, all from federal surveys, federal US surveys. What you'll find on every outcome we've looked at, those from intact married families who worship weekly do best. Those who do worst are those from broken families who don't worship at all. And then depending on the outcome, you've got second or third place between the intact who worship and the intact who don't. And on some you can see, or the non-intact who worship weekly, and the intact who don't worship at all. So you can see in that one where, you know, the marriage structure seems to carry more weight almost than the religious worship. But in all, when you get both combined, overwhelmingly, the core strength of the country is in those who are either married adults who worship weekly or kids from families that are married and worship weekly. I want to move on because it's a bit hard doing this without all the charts. But a way to sum up, if you were to look at what actually is happening to the country over the last 50 years, gradually you've had an increase in rejection. And going along with that, you've had a decrease in human capacity at the macro level when you measure. Increased rejection and decreased capacity. What we really need is the very opposite. And this, I think, is where the love and fidelity comes in. And this is where I'm going to propose what I think are some of the fundamentals. Over the last 200 years, almost, starting, I would say, with the French Revolution, but not as well articulated then. By about 60 years later, with Marx and Engels, you had the beginning of the attack on both family and religion in a concerted way. Nietzsche added to that. Fast forward into England, if you know a bit about English history, maybe Professor Kerry haven't talked about this, but the Apostles and some of the Bohemian groups that then began to radicalize, even within England, the move on what you call sexual liberation, which immediately means an attack on marriage and on married sexuality. Margaret Sanger, then here it's institutionalized a bit. Rockefeller Foundation got behind that, Ford later. Universities begin to change. You've got a whole radical agenda on matters sexual gathering apace over the last 200 years. Now pretty well enculturated in the academia, in the media, and somewhat even in the churches. At the same time, you have this attack is going on, not only that, but on religion, which, and those who do political science and philosophy, political philosophy can address this much, much better than I can. But what you can see in practice actually is a radical experiment never before attempted in all of human history, which is to do away and to weaken or put on the side two of the most fundamental institutions that humans need to thrive: marriage and religion. Now, the onslaught on that, actually what you have then is a model of society. We've got two competing models. And actually this, if you take one, is the traditional Judeo-Christian model, behind which is the Ten Commandments, which is a way of saying natural law. They're pretty similar. In the functioning society, you need more worship of God, more marriage, and more children. If you were to picture a block, a three-dimensional block, more marriage, more worship, more marriage, and more children. And the more you go from the low point up to the transverse to the opposite, you're getting a more and more functional society. The more you have less worship of God, less marriage, and less children, what you have actually is a more and more dysfunctional, non-operating society. Actually, I think that's one of the major problems. This is a bit of an aside, but it's a commentary well worth making because I'm thinking it through. Spain, Italy, and Greece, in the last 2 generations, have competed with each other for the lowest fertility rates in the world and a massive drop in religious attendance. And no matter what happens, the euro banks, or whatever else, again, it's not going to change that. And what you have here actually is a massive slowing down of the cycle of nature. Let's leave human beings aside for a second. Go to farming. We have plenty of farmers in this country who know how to do farming very well. But farmers have to sow the seed at a particular time of the year. There are tasks they have to do: till the land, put the fertilizer in, let the growing time happen, and then come and reap. If a farmer doesn't sow his seed at a particular time of the year, the right time of the year, what's going to happen the next year? He's not going to get the crop. It's that simple. And farmers are very aware of that. They got their 2 feet well on the ground. You better stick with the cycle. Now, human beings have a similar cycle. There's a time when you grow, there's a time when you sow, and there's a time when you reap. You grow when you're young, you sow when you're a young adult, and you reap in your middle and old age. Spain, Italy, and Greece, and Japan is already dead. It's just a matter of when we have the funeral. Spain, Italy, and Greece are violating that and essentially are going down. We're close to it, but we're not. We're slowing down. We're in a crisis. But let's get on to how we handle it. The competing model, and actually think about it, Planned Parenthood's model, or whatever you want to call it, Planned Parenthood, radical left, postmodernist, there's lots of different terms you could put on it. And I don't have one good umbrella one, but let's call it that other model. Less God, less marriage, less children. That, by the way, is the dominant model in Congress. It's a dominant model in many state legislators, not all, and there's a battle royal going on. But that model, we all, just think it through, is going to lead to more and more dysfunction. So you've got here, again, you're on the cutting edge of something that's radically different and needed. Well, actually, it's not different, it's old, but needed. What I propose, actually, if you think back to any of the great competitions in history, and in recent times, take the Founding Fathers, take England, Second World War. And I'd say, well, just take both of those. Both big wars, big battles. But the most important thing that was needed was not the armies. Something happened prior to the army and prior to all the fighting. And that was a vision of the good that the leader proposed. Could England have won the Second World War without Winston Churchill? Probably not. Could the nation have been founded without the vision that the Founding Fathers proposed? We fought a war and were beaten in Vietnam. We won every battle, We won all the major incursions, and we failed to win the war. Because there was not a vision articulated that people bought into and fought for. It is critical in moving forward to have a vision. And what I propose, actually, what is needed for this country is a vision of something that will take care of all the goods needed. Can we articulate that vision? Can we make it? Can we sell it in such a way that people will understand it? The one that I propose that will take care of all of our national ills, all, is to grow the young, intact, married family that worships God weekly. That's what a nation is all about. That's like the farmer sowing his crop on time. That's the good crop. If we have young, intact, married families that worship God weekly, everything improves. Everything. Education, health, happiness, income, savings, crime drops, addiction drops. Will it cure every single thing? No. Fallen human nature is fallen human nature. But it is the good that just naturally is there, much like the farmer. You would never say to the farmer, don't sow your crop next year. Societies that don't have this as an inbuilt, and I think before it was there unarticulated, now we need to articulate. Guys, by the way, what this means is that as soon as you graduate or about to graduate, you need to be getting married, because young men with time and money and unhooked and unharnessed are trouble. So you got to start thinking that way. And ladies, you're right, get them thinking that way. So dress pretty, do all the right things, pray for them, court them, do whatever. But get them there. And guys, you need it. You will live longer, you will save more. No need to go into it here, and it's not exactly the right setting, but your sexual life will far surpass anything the guys who are going the other way think they're going to get. There's no comparison. On every single outcome measured, the intact married family that worships God weekly does best in aggregate on every single measure. That's what the social sciences show. A phrase I like is that the social sciences, well done, cannot but illustrate the way God made man. They just illustrate human nature playing its way out. And when or another way to say that, the social sciences actually illustrate natural law, is another way you could put it. The violation of that is shown also in the data. So one of the things actually I think we've got going on our side, which I think we've got to become much more brazen about. Bold, brazen is not the right word, but bold in an attractive way. People, the social science data will show people are free to choose. We can't take that away, we're all free. However, we're not free to choose the consequences. Nobody is free to choose. The consequences are built in. They're in your bias, they're in your psyche, they're in your hardwiring, your soft wiring. Make your choice, but you can't choose the consequences. You know that already. Like, you want to pass an exam, you're free to choose not to study. You're not free to choose the consequence of that. It happens. It's much the same in the sexual, in marriage, in worship of God and all the rest. We're free to choose, we're not free to choose the consequence. And that, I think, is one of the great roles that the social science can play in this. And America in particular, because in this country, we can have a huge effect globally. No other country in the world has a data system to compare to ours. None. Some of them have very good ones on family, but even there we're far superior. And virtually none of them have anything on religion. And we've got a lot. So on those two things, actually, we can use the social science for our own benefit here, but also have a huge international impact. So what I propose, actually, is that the young, intact married family is that which everybody should be dedicated to. Everybody. Parents are naturally dedicated to that once their kids reach a certain age, but all the institutions. Now, what this means actually is there's a practical application of this. The politics of this, the polis, I mean the good society, kids are raised at a local level, not at a national level. You were raised in a local community by your parents, with other parents, with a church, hopefully, or a religious institution, church, synagogue, mosque, and school. And the natural way for kids to be raised is where those three cooperate very much. The more they cooperate, you've got the values, you've got the religion, you've got the friendships, you've got the networks, the whole lot. The raising of children and to going on offense, you're beginning here at the college level with the Love and Fidelity network. As you leave school, and in the next 10 years you're going to be having your own children, you need to be operating at the very local level where we get the total political freedom to have the cooperation between family, church, and school, in whatever way local parents want it, whatever mixes are possible. As a matter of fact, that's the biggest political freedom I think we need. You can take almost everything else away, but leave us that, and you have the future, because you have the child. Family, church, and school together cooperating will raise that stronger child. Those who have a very different agenda have gradually split those three apart. It's divide and conquer. Pushing religion out of the schools happened gradually over quite some time. The 40s was a big period. And then gradually splitting family from school has happened increasingly. All the sexual education is one, but even actually at the school board level. Less and less, the bigger and bigger the school boards got, the less local control there is over it. So one of the huge political freedoms to get, to make possible the intact married family that worships weekly, is a realignment of all three of these major institutions working together to pull it off, with all teaching the very same lesson. First, actually starting with churches. How many churches teach monogamy from the pulpit? Synagogues, mosques, temples? Chastity? If the churches don't do it, the families definitely aren't going to hear it much. You need the same in the schools. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I dream of, and I don't see why it couldn't happen, is where high school teachers begin to take this social science data, federal data, peer-reviewed secular journal, and construct their own courses on sexuality, on marriage, on the comparative aspects, letting kids know that you're totally free to choose, but you're not free to choose the consequences. And it's good for you to know what they are. Here's the data. Imagine that being taught in every public high school in the country. That's what's needed. This is where you get the alignment then of family, of church, and of school together. Up and down, we all need those same lessons. So that gradually people begin to realize that the foundational relationship of society, out of which all other relationships that are strong grow, is the relationship between not just mother and father, but more particularly husband and wife, who are mother and father. That's the foundational relationship. If that's fractured, and if it continues to be fractured, actually you can kiss America goodbye. Our economy is going and weakening, so is our constitutional order. If that is healed, it grows even more. It can regrow. And I think that's the big challenge that's now in front of us, to regrow American society. And within that, here I think you are right on the cutting edge at the most fundamental level. If the intact marital relationship is the core relationship of society, and I think it is, what is the fundamental virtue in society? What's the foundational virtue of a thriving society? It's chastity. It's not necessarily the most important, but it is the most foundational. Because when that's violated, the relationship is violated. And it becomes less and less possible. So what you're doing, actually, you're cutting edge. You are analogous to the founding fathers of the country. You are the refounding fathers, brothers, sisters, fathers, and mothers of the United States that can be again if you are successful. No, I should rephrase that. When you are successful. God bless. May you go forward. May you bring lots of young people to join you in your efforts. Thanks very much.
What is the connection between, as we are growing more and more and rejecting each other as lovers and in a romantic way and in a communal way socially, as we reject each other, how is that decreasing our capacity? And also, what can we do in ourselves and our friends and people we know to kind of push them to have a greater capacity?
Well, this could be a long discourse in philosophy and political philosophy and all the rest. Let me cut to the quick, in a way, and a bit clinically, and because this is where it let me tell an anecdote. And it's a real one. It had a huge influence on me. I started off as a young clinical psychologist, trained in Ireland, went to Canada. First year, very inexperienced, so proceeding very carefully. Half of my practice was kids in mid-childhood, normally referred by either a pediatrician or a general practitioner who said, Pat, would you have a look at this kid? This is the way that most referrals came. There's something wrong with him. I know it's not medical. I think it's psychological. That was the way the referrals went. First year, I did a lot of batteries of tests, because you're trained well in psychology. It's a very safe way to go. By the end of the first year, from the tests, I could see most kids were reacting to what was happening in the family. So by the second year, even though I was learning a lot more about family therapy, family systems, and getting training in that. So by the third year, here's the way the referrals went. Most kids in mid-childhood, meaning from about age 4 to 10, 9, 10. I wouldn't see the kid until I could see the whole family. The most difficult thing was getting dad to get away from work to come in with the rest of the family. This was up in Sault Ste. Marie in Canada, Algoma Steel. They were steel workers. It took a bit of, but one or two dads I had to tussle with them a bit. I said, look, you're asking me to look after your kid, and you're not prepared to come in? Get in here. You know, that steel workers understood language like that, and they came. Here's what happened. In the first couple of sessions, 3, 4, 5 sessions, would keep the focus off the kid, begin to get to know what was happening in the family, and as that was happening, get a sense of what was happening between mom and dad. This is early 70s. Most marriages are still intact. They didn't have the same rate of breakdown. After a number of sessions, I'd say to the parents, let's leave the kids at home the next time, just the 3 of us get together. They always said yes. Great. And then I'd start working on where the conflicts were. In that third year, I never had to do a thing with the kid. Once I started helping the parents heal the conflicts, the kids started thriving again. Now, that to me illustrates the fundamental nature of belonging. When mom and dad began to belong to each other again, learned how to do it. They wanted it, they had goodwill, they'd just gotten into patterns of conflict and all the usual stuff that couples can get into where they're getting less and less happy with each other. Once they began to heal that, the kids are already now, the nest they live in is much more comfortable, and they know it. It doesn't have to be articulated, and they just thrive again. Excuse me, we're made to belong. You are seeking something, or if you are not married, you're hoping eventually to belong to somebody who will belong to you, who will really belong to you. And that, of course, is a matter of a lot of anxiety for a lot of us, because just looking around, you say, people say they're going to commit, but will they really belong? Which really means that when the going gets tough, are they going to keep going? A Christian way of putting it is, are they going to pick up the cross that's needed to love? When it gets difficult, that's when the real love begins. That's when the belonging is done. We're made to belong that way. And when we belong that way, we're so much happier. Rejection is where somebody comes along, invites you into their life, and then someday says, get out of my life. Now, it's not just anybody. If it's the person on whom you have based your whole existence, the rest of your existence by committing to them and bringing kids into the world, I can't think of a deeper psychological wound than that. Yeah, there are rape and those things, but in the normal thing, that is an awful thing. The one who had committed themselves now says, get out of my life. Increasingly, that's happening. And what they're really saying, not just to the partner, but also saying to their kids, you don't matter as much as I matter to myself. For most of human history, for all, right up to very recent times, parents would sacrifice for their kids. And it was good, actually, if a marriage was not great, but the parents would say, we're going to stick together for their sake. Now, it would be better still, actually, if they go get good therapy or good whatever and restore their marriage. But it is very good to say, we will not reject each other because it's going to not only damage us, it'll really damage the kids. You sacrifice for the kids. How many stories I've heard of poor Irish washerwomen who came over here, emigrated, washed floors and all the rest to put their kids through high school and maybe on to college, and their son becomes a lawyer and the poor mother then is taken care of in her old age. The sacrifices they made for their kids. That was the ethos. And that's the ethos to be restored. Because belonging doesn't, it's not romance all the time. It's romance some of the time. That's the perfume that helps you, you know, and we need it all the time, etc. But love is real belonging, and there's a more fundamental happiness and sense of peace of belonging even when the going is tough, even when you feel like rejecting. As a matter of fact, that's when the belonging is most. I feel like rejecting you, I'm not going to. We thrive on that way. When the other happens, we as adults, men used to, the biggest, back in the 50s and up through the early 60s, the biggest reason for men's suicide used to be severe unemployment, chronic unemployment. It would get to men and they'd suicide. Starting in the late 60s, it's shifted from that to divorce. And divorce became the leading cause of men's suicide. I don't know if that answered the question, but I was trying to get to the underlying dynamic.
Yes, please, right here. And please project a bit because we don't have microphones with you.
So in citing social sciences, I find that's such an effective way to promote these values of marriage and family and sexual integrity, especially in a secular setting. But it can sometimes be frustrating. Like I've cited Brad Wilcox before, for instance, on various studies, and the almost like violent responses that you'll get, like, who is this man that conducted a study? He's this sexist, patronizing, like, and then they'll present some study that claims to show contrary to what he's claiming. And how do you kind of combat that and move through that when someone just rejects a study? I don't know.
Well, I think the question, I don't know if everybody got it. Using the social science, this young lady has used that before, using Brad Wilcox, who's an eminent sociologist, and they'd just be rebutted and say, oh, he's just an ideologue or something, he's just making his own stuff. There's this other study over here. How do you get around that? I think there are two very different things. The battle of the social sciences goes on at the high level among the social scientists, not among undergrads in the coffee shop. It's battled out in the journals. And if they start getting into that, you say, well, look, let's go. The serious answer to be, let's do a review of the literature. Are you on for that? We get 3, 4, 5 people, we pull out the best reviews, and let's have a real good discussion. By and large, the data is going to come out pretty much that way. Now, there's always ongoing things. But on the big issues, for instance, back, 15 years ago or so, you had the whole issue of whether marriage was key. That debate was over. That one is won. Sarah McClanahan here at Princeton was one of the key players in that, Linda Waite, who are pretty liberal on a lot of political issues. And they had a lot of standing, but as the data became clearer and clearer, they shifted with the data. The top social scientists, I think, are the people to go to for that sort of stuff. The other thing, however, and this is something actually, Dr. Kerry, I think in your remarks, I was triggered by it. Social science data, the social science is a bit like, it's natural law, it's like a rock. You can't violate it. But have you ever been motivated to do anything by social science data? I haven't. However, it does have, it's almost like a foundation. It's like a floor. You can't go against it. If you go against it, you're bashing your head against a rock and it's going to split open. Free to choose, you're not free to choose the consequences. What I do think moves people are two things. Instead of data, real stories. Real stories of real people. And particularly of people who moved from brokenness to happiness, which will always mean an increase in whatever virtue is in play. Where they change their life with struggle or with the help of others. That's what moves people. The other thing that moves is even more alive than that. And that's the good example and the happiness of the people around them. So that's contact and friendship. Those two things, I think, will move much more than the social science. But the social science, I have a vision, actually, I hope will happen some days, to have clubs all across campuses throughout the country, where when a professor who's postmodernist or whatever, violating natural law, says something, and some student just puts his hand up and says, "Professor, how can you say that when the data says this?" Now, the big training too is then to teach the student not to say another word. You can't get into an argument with a professor and win. You'll lose, and lose badly. But just to ask the question. And then, depending on how the professor answers the question, it'll either be reasonable and be good, or be unreasonable, and the students will know it. And gradually, just by having really good data available on the web, more and more, all the good studies, where you can refer to it. So, good.
I think that Cassandra Huff already had that vision, one of the founder of Love and Fidelity Network. So, well done. Now, someone else had a hand just in the back. Yes.
You specified that you had a set of data that showed when you control for the man, the number of times that the women have had sexual partners before marriage, what was the level of intactness? You started from 80% down to 54 and so forth. Did you do this study other way around where you controlled for, you did not? Okay.
Where we controlled for?
For the number of times that the man had had sexual partners before entering marriage.
The time we did it, it was a National Survey of Family Growth, and it used to only be on women. A couple of years ago, they've added the men, and we haven't done it, but we're about to do it. And we'd like to see it replicated. And it's very simple, actually. This is straight correlation stuff. It's not, but the differences are so big. I'm sure once we start adding the controls, the difference will diminish, but the impact will still be there, I'm pretty certain. And it comports with human nature. Imagine, for instance, just imagine this, the huge benefit the woman has who has never had a sexual relation with anybody except her husband. Her temptations are a lot less. Or the guy who's never had any sexual relations except with his wife. He's never known another woman. He has no memories of something he wishes he could have. She has no memories of something different. It's a massive benefit. The natural order, the way that's meant to be. Just thinking that through psychologically, you don't need proof for that. It's just it can't be but otherwise. And gradually, actually, it takes time to get good at anything. And it takes time for a couple to get good at sexual relations. And with practice, it gets better and better. That's what married couples gradually learn. And it is great if they know nothing else or no one else, because they have nothing to tempt them. And if they become relaxed enough and trusting in each other, they can learn to be married better and better, more and more sensitively to each other. And every person is unique. Every wife is unique in her needs, every husband is unique in his, and a uniqueness grows between the two. And it's best that it's never shared with anyone else or in any other way.
Do we have a follow-up? Yes, in the white.
Follow up on that same study, do you have any recollection of the percentages of how those various groups broke up in order to explain how the data, because you've got the one sexual partner being your husband, and then how those next groups came together in that survey. Were they evenly distributed?
Oh no, there's quite.
How did they break up?
I don't have all the answers to all the questions. We just did. We were interested in this, but I can tell you there's a bell curve in everything. Okay, and your guess is as good as mine, because right now I'd be just guessing, to be honest. I suspect that the bell curve heightens around 2 to 3 partners and then drops off. But the more partners, well, STDs and all the rest. But the big, and it's very interesting, I suspect the bell curve heightens at not a huge number. But the massive drop is between 0 and 1 outside of marriage. From 80 down to 54. Huge. The second, from 54 down to 44. Now, this needs to be replicated, but it's so stunning. And if this holds right across, it is massive in its impact. And people have always known, actually, you get into philosophy, the biggest, one of the foundational virtues without which the rest of the virtues cannot be that well pursued is chastity. Think of the guys at high school you knew who chased the girls. What happened to their studies? What happened to their friendships? What happened to their loyalty? I'll tell you a good story on this one. This is true. It's not research data. Do we have time? How are we doing?
We're doing all right. We've got about 5 minutes, and I've got at least one more question.
An Irishman with a good story. Here it is real quick. 3 points. From West Point, professor of political philosophy, just war, but it's just war for the regular soldier, not for the president declaring war, but the soldier who has to fight it. You get, once soldiers killed for the first time, a lot of stress. Out of that, there's a certain proportion of post-traumatic stress disorder. Bethesda Naval Psychiatric Center began to look into this. They saw patterns where the stress was much higher than the others. What it came down to was there was a big difference. If a soldier was in a unit commanded by an officer that they trusted as a good moral man, the PSTD rates were very, very low. They were there, much higher when the soldiers didn't trust the moral judgment of the officer who said shoot. What was the difference between, how did soldiers know to trust an officer? You know what their criteria was? Is he faithful to his wife or his girlfriend? That was their major moral criterion. Fundamental, in battle, when it comes right down to it, they got right to the core. Who's the guy I trust? If he's faithful to his wife, he's a trustworthy guy. If he's not, PSTD goes up. Good story, I hope.